forgotten old lighthouse, and the eyes appeared. The town had been skilled at forgetting. Abandoned alleys grew moss and memory in equal measures. Shops put up new signs and pretended the sea had been the only neighbor all along. When Elias returned to catalogue the lighthouse relics for a small museum, the tower came like a bruise on the horizon, still taller than the newer houses, still keeping its stubborn tilt. That opening line of the assignment felt like permission to pry, and he had never learned to refuse permissions when they smelled faintly of other people's pasts. Inside the Lighthouse Museum, among a scatter of ship models and brittle photographs, Elias found the logbook. It sat beneath a cracked display case, leather softened by hands and storms, its strap undone as if someone else had just set it down. The handwriting inside changed from neat entries of oil prices and foghorn checks to cramped lines that slackened and then trembled with uncertainty, reports of glimmers at the glass, of feeling watched while the lamp burned. The sentences never said who watched, only that watching had begun. He read those entries at home with a mug gone cold beside him, the sound of the sea a distant, steady punctuation. The writer had noted the simplest intrusions first, tiny circles in condensation, an idea of eyes when staring into lamp glass late at night. Elias told himself the mind made patterns out of chaos, that our brains are little factories of faces. Still, a single sentence lodged under his ribs. They learn the light. It suggested not merely presence, but patient education. And the phrase looped inside him, harder to discard than dust. He went back to the tower to photograph artifacts, to be practical, to translate worry into pixels. The keeper's oil lamp sat as if still warm. The brass was blackened in a manner that made it look like a mouth paused mid-breath. Through the viewfinder, something caught at the edge of the frame, a glint that resolved into the suggestion of an eye inside a chip of glass. When he lowered the camera, the pane was ordinary and empty. The townspeople, encountering his questions, turned their faces away with the polite cruelty of those who protect habitual silence. There was a smear on one of the higher windows, a crescent like a thumbprint made of fog and time. Elias pressed his palm to it and felt the glass cold and slightly damp. The smear held the room in miniature, the coil of the stair, the lamp's brass curve, a slant of sky. In that tiny world, he thought he could see a dark point that steadied like a pupil. He couldn't say whether it watched him or waited for him to notice that it had learned where he stood. The foghorn sounded then, deeper than the map warranted. Sleep thinned like paper. In the days that followed, Elias found eyes everywhere the world held glass. A photograph of a previous keeper's family with an extra bright catch in one child's pupils. A sheen on the wet stones that drew the shape of an eye when the tide receded. He began to test himself with mirrors, tilting them to catch angles, and looking for the moment a reflection would refuse to be merely his. Each near miss fed the suspicion that seeing itself had been taught to replicate interest, impatient, careful, as if it practiced while he blinked. The stairway to the lantern room was a kind of confession. Each ascent folded history into rope-worn steps. At the top, light pooled and broke across the Fresnel lens, into a constellation of pinprick glares. When he stepped closer, his breath clouded the glass, and for a staggered second, the lens held more than reflections. Small, bright ovals that seemed to arrange themselves along the rings, not quite aligned as a photographer's artifact. Their arrangement implied attention rather than accident, as if the glass had learned where to place its curiosity. He found, at the very center of the lantern room, the last pages of the logbook shoved beneath a loose board, entries not about weather, but about waiting. The handwriting softened into second-person phrases, a keeper writing to someone he expected would come. "You will bring light, and we will learn your rhythm." On the final page, someone had written a name, and for a suspended heartbeat, Elias read his own. The pen seemed to bruise the page where the letters landed. There was no sound, but the faint breath of the sea and the tiny, patient tick of the mechanism. He did not know if he had been summoned or simply followed the gravity of curiosity. The light, when he ran it, did not flare in the old theatrical way. Instead, the beam swept with a deliberateness that felt more like selection than illumination, pausing at windows, drawing white lines across the town's sleeping faces. He left the room to stand on the cliff and watch that beam find the houses where people had once looked to see and found nothing. Pieces of the beam lingered like breath. For a moment, he thought he saw faces in that pause, stilled, patient, cataloging. At dawn, he packed the logbook into his satchel and left the tower. He told himself he would deliver it to the museum and close the chapter on a story that had no physical wound to press a finger into. But as he walked through the town, the streetlights held mirrors of his own eyes back to him, and friends offered him polite smiles that did not quite meet. The beam swept one last time, a punctual, slow arc that touched the houses, and then paused, as if contemplating a new lesson plan. He realized then the most subtle teaching, that looking could be contagious. He locked the logbook in his apartment drawer and tried to resume ordinary life. But ordinary does not easily accept a newly opened seam. Sometimes, tilting a mug, he would catch the light where it formed an oval and feel the particular prickle of being inspected. He learned to close curtains, to prefer darkened plates in cafes, to walk streets with his head angled not straight on, but off-kilter, as though misalignment might throw off whatever apprenticeship had begun. The last thing he saw before sleep lately was not the ceiling, but the suggestion of a small, patient light learning the angle of his lids. Some nights, he imagines the tower's lamp sweeping over the town, even when he knows it is idle, imagining the beam pausing at other windows to study patterns of laundry and bookshelves, the careful details that teach a thing to be curious. He does not say whether the eyes are human, glass, or rumor made flesh. The last entry in the logbook had no period. It ended like a breath held open. When he closes his eyes, he feels the sensation of being catalogued, not hurt, but observed, as if he has been placed, gently and permanently, in a drawer labeled interested. Outside, the ocean learns to keep its secrets a little longer.